We've seen how to create variables of various data types. We've worked with strings containing alphanumeric characters, integers, which are whole numbers, singles and doubles, which are floating point values, and booleans being either true or false. But one that we haven't looked at is date. And I usually refer to as date as a date object, because really all these variables are objects. The date object has properties and methods just like any instance of a class. In this lesson, I'd like to look at how to create and initialize date objects, how to get the current date and time from the system clock, how to format a date for output, whether you want to say Sunday, July 20th, 1969, or just simply 7/20/69, or lots of other options that are available to us as far as output, and then how to find the difference between dates. I was thrilled as a young boy watching the Apollo 11 moon landing, in which Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin walked on the moon. It was one small step for man and one giant step for mankind, and that occurred on July 20th, 1969. That thrill for me repeated itself when I watched my friend and colleague, Dr. Cyan Proctor, go into space on September 15th, 2021. It had been her lifelong dream to be an astronaut. She taught geology at South Mountain Community College. It was extremely cool to watch her go into space and to see her realize that lifelong dream. So I wanted to know, how many days was it between the Apollo 11 moon landing and Dr. Proctor's launch into space on the SpaceX Inspiration 4. She was the first African-American woman to pilot a spacecraft. Well, we can use the date objects in Visual Basic to discover that. And here's what we do. We can dim a variable as a date. So I have Apollo moon as date. And then to assign that date, we can use the format of month/day/year, but we encapsulate that in hashtags or pound symbols. So it's hashtag 7/20/1969's hashtag, and that's a string. Then I did the same thing for Proctor launch, 9/15/2021 in hashtags. I wanted to find out what day of the week that was. As I said, date objects have properties and methods, and one of the method of a date object is day of week. And it returns a number for the day of the week, but then we can convert that to a string, and it gives us a literal day, Sunday through Saturday. So I dimmed weekday as string equals Proctor launch.dayofweek.toString. And then there's an object called a TimeSpan. I dim difference is the name of my variable, as a TimeSpan. With TimeSpan, we can do math on dates. So I'm going to subtract the Apollo moon date from the Proctor launch date. Then I began to build my string for my message box. I use a string builder to do that. Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin landed on the moon on. I use the append line method of SB to say VBRCLF, so it went down to the second line, and Apollo moon, again my date object, dot toLongDate string. That's a method that will convert that date object to a string and give us the long date. That's going to be the day of the week, the month, the day, and the year. And then I appended to that, Dr. Cyan Proctor of SMCC flew the Inspiration 4 SpaceX mission on, and again, appended line, I wanted that weekday, and a literal string of a comma space. And then I used Proctor launch.toString. Now we looked at how to format numbers with toString. We can also format date objects with toString. And I can specify a string of the format that I want. The format I chose to do here was the month, period, day, period, and a 4-digit year. There's all kinds of things we can do with toString. We'll look at those in a minute. And then I appended that was, and I took the difference dot total days, and I formatted that as N0. It's an integer with no decimal, but I wanted to get the comma in there after the thousands place. That's why I did N0. And then conclude that with days later. And then I show that as a message box using that prompt and the title of Days Between Apollo 11 Landing and Inspiration 4 Launch. And there is the message box. So we can see how it displays the dates, Sunday, July 20th, 1969, Wednesday, 9/15/2021. And it was 19,050 days later. Let's take a little bit deeper look at how to format these data strings. A good place to read more about the date data type is the Microsoft Learn documentation. And as we scroll down through this information, there are a couple of links here. One is the standard date and time format strings. And this, we'll look at all these here in a minute, but there's different ways of formatting the date object with toString with just some simple specifications of a single character. And then there's also the custom date and time format strings. And here we can use different designations within a string that we build of how we want the data to be displayed. And we'll look at all those in a minute. There's also a website here from the bbprogrammer.com that has a really nice table in terms of using those different designations. In fact, in some ways I think it's made more thorough than the Microsoft Learn documentation. I created a Visual Basic application to work with strings and demonstrate the different formats. Before I do that though, I wanted to mention that in the previous video on numeric data formatting with ToString, I forgot to mention there's placeholders. And you can use a hashtag or a pound sign for a digit or a 0 for a digit display. The 0 will force a 0 if there's no value. So to give you an example of that, I just have ABC equals 602.305.5605. And then the phone num equals abc.toString. And I'm going to take those digits and place those into a format for a phone number. And then I display that. So let me run my application. I'll show you that, and we'll get into using ToString with dates. So here's the output of that code. I get 602 in parentheses, a space, 305 hyphen 5605. So displaying that number as a phone number. Now let's take a look at the dates here. So there's some built-in formatting into the date object. As we saw in the Apollo moon landing one, I used .toLong date string. It gives me a long date string with the day of the week, month, day, and year. There's also a toShort date string, which is going to give me the month, day, and year with slashes. Universal date time is Greenwich Mean Time, and then we can also work with time. So even though it's a date object, it does contain times, and so we can strip out the date and just work with the time, either as long time or short time. And we'll see examples of those in a minute. Then I can use the toString method of the date object, specify an argument in the parentheses as D for a short date, as lowercase d for a short date, uppercase D for a long date. That's basically the same as the toLong date and toShort date string methods. We can do F for a full date time. That's going to give us the date and the time together as short, but if I do a capital F, it'll do it as long. And again, we'll see examples of that. The general date, short time, general date, long time, so lowercase g. Well, this should be an uppercase G, sorry about that. And then I can do a uppercase M or M, lowercase m for the month and the day, or an O for the round trip date time. That's one's a little confusing. Uppercase R or lowercase r for a coordinated universal date time. A sortable date time is S. The short time and the long time is a lowercase t and uppercase T. And then a lowercase u is the universal sortable date time, and uppercase is the universal long date time. And then finally I can get just the year and month. Now we saw on that website we could create our own strings as far as how we want to format this in any way we want. So we can use things like D for day, M for enter the month, 2 uppercase M's for the 2-digit month. So we're going to force, it's like July be 07. 3 digits for the month as an abbreviation, so APR for April or FEB for February. A 4-digit year or 2-digit year, 4 Y's or just 1 Y. And then we can also do times of H for the hour, 2 uppercase H's for 24 hour, 2 lowercase m's for minutes, and 2 lowercase s's for seconds. And so here's some examples. So we build our string. Let's look at that for our current date time. And so now it's pulling the date time off my system clock and showing what the current date time is. Today is July 19, 2024, and I'm doing this at 5:08:43 p.m. And then I take that date time and I format it with all these different options. So here's the built-in methods for long date, short date, universal date, long time, short time. Here are those string arguments that are built in with just a single letter, and you can see the code that I used here and the result of that code. And then here's the custom one. So I did m.d.y and I get 7.19.24. Here's the year with an underscore and the month underscore and the day. Here's the 4-digit year, the month abbreviated, and the day. And then here's the time as hours, minutes, and seconds. Now the way I got this date time was I used my date as date equals date.now. Now is a property of the date object that pulls the date and time from the system clock. For this one I have July 4th, 1776, Day of Independence. I dimmed my date as date and I used that hashtag encoding of the day, of the month, day, and year as a string. and then displayed July 4, 1776 is all those different dates and times. Now, I didn't specify a time, so it used the stroke of midnight. I also created a date picker. This is a control inside our toolbox, and we can come in and we can choose a date, past or future. I'm going to pull this one, 1984. Let's say I want March, and let's do 15th, and there is Thursday, March 15th, 1984, and all of the dates and times adjusted for the output with the ToString methods. I want to know how many days it was since Independence Day. Independence Day was 90,596 days ago. That's approximately, I divided it by 365.25, so it's approximately 248.04 years ago, or about 6.2 generations. Figure a generation is 40 years. So how many great-grandfathers would I have to get back to somebody in my family who maybe was part of Independence Day? I don't use dates and times very much, but it's helpful, I think, to know that you can format these in all different ways. And usually I just refer to the documentation to get the one that I want. So come back and look at this video when you're trying to do a date-time format and take a look at the options. If you just jumped into this video, you can see all the videos from the Programming Practicum playlist by clicking on the image in the lower right. And if you'd like to be alerted to future videos I create, you can click my picture in the top right to subscribe to the channel.